And we are live. Good morning, everybody. I am Angie Callen, joined by my friends Denise Bittler and Carolina Bustamante. And today we are diving right into this thing. And we are talking about how to follow up in your job search. I feel like in the whole, who do I reach out to? How and who do I network? Which, by the way, we talked about last month with Karen and Mark in our grapevine conversation. So these two dovetail off of each other perfectly. The how do I follow up? When do I follow up? What do I say is like this whole rabbit hole of questions that people tend to ask us quite a bit. And so I figured who better to just hit it head on and give everybody some advice out there than Denise, who has a solution for everything, and Carolina, who is a recruiter and career coach by night. So she knows exactly what types of messages she gets and what we should be saying and shouldn't be saying. So I always like to just start it off a little spicy. Denise, I'll come to you first. What is the worst follow-up advice you are seeing job seekers get right now?
Just make sure you reach out and keep reaching out and just start following up with anybody you can get your hand, you can get in contact with. And it's basically no substance. So we always talk about quantity or quality over quantity. And this is one of those prime examples where people are just being told quantity instead of focusing on the quality.
Carolina, what are you seeing right now in bad follow-up or bad follow-up advice?
No, I agree. And the biggest thing is making it very generic. I think people are following up just for the sake of following up, but they're not making it specific. So it just sounds like a random copy paste versus, specific to the role. So
may I add that this is in line with what both of you said. What Denise said, I think, is just broad scope bad job search advice across the board in every single element of like, hey, go do the thing, with no actual practical advice on how to do the thing, and also the quality versus quantity problem that we have in many arenas right now because of our little friend whose initials may be AI. And Carolina, I'm guessing you're seeing this too, because I think one of our the thing that can hurt you is following up too much. And we'll talk about what's too much. I always say ride the fine line between annoyance and persistence, but what does that look like is a question. But it can actually hurt you to follow up with either generic or AIC of sameness messages. And so, Carolina, I'm curious, I know you have to be the recipient of this kind of stuff because LinkedIn allows you to do it, right? It's like, hey, follow up with the person who posted this job. Here's a suggested template. And I'm just curious what percentage of follow-ups do you get that are actually just a generic, you can tell they're copy paste and or AI generated?
I would say 80% of them.
Okay.
And you see the same wording, which is funny. Like it's the same exact, like I have experience in this, and that. It's like the same exact framework. So it was just like a quick random AI follow-up. You can tell.
Yeah, or hey, just checking in.
Yeah.
And that's it. Yeah. I don't get much.
And so to not be victims of our own irritation, what do you think, Denise? I'll come to you first. What are some of your favorite sound bites here, or word bites is maybe the better term, for following up that can help people avoid the, hey, just checking in? And I know there's a ton of context here that we're going to get into a bunch of different scenarios, because one of the things I love about these like 1 hour deep dives with experts is we actually get to look at these specific scenarios. Are you following up after an interview? Are you following up to a recruiter? Are you following up to a network? Are you following up to a business lead? We might even go there, y'all. But just in general, what are some of your word bites or ways that sound a little bit more intentional than just, hey, checking in? Because I try to avoid those words at all costs.
So it comes down to value. It's, if you're listening in an interview, you're hearing what that interviewer is saying, what's important to them, what, specific areas or problems or whatever. So you don't just say, thanks so much for taking the time to meet with me. No, you go do research on what's important to them. You go do maybe a deeper dive on the company, something they mentioned, or again, something that is important to the interviewer. So when you're reaching out, you're saying, I was really fascinated by what XYZ that you said. So I did a little more research. I came across this article. I'm not sure if you saw it. I'm thinking you might find it interesting. So you're not just generic, hey, I'm following up. Did I get the job? It's, I valued our time together. I valued our conversation. I value you. And here is something that I have done over and above to make
Mm.
a better, deeper connection with you.
That's a very human approach. And Carolina, I'm coming to you next because I want to know from you what actually makes you want to like open, let alone read, let alone respond. But before I come there, Denise, I think what you said is important because one thing I feel very strongly not to do when you're following up on an interview specifically is rehash something you feel like you didn't sell well, because that is always going to smell like desperation. Instead, you could go positive and say like, hey, here's something I actually thought of afterwards that I thought you might like. It shows that you actually were listening and kind of understood the human. And it's a way to do something extra without trying to resell.
Well, because it becomes
and
a
so
conversation. It's then a conversation,
yes.
not an ask.
And to me, that's like the biggest misstep in all aspects of networking and follow-up is we forget we're trying to create a series of touch points versus trying to get it all done in one fell swoop, which just is not realistic. And I have a piece that I'll add to this after Carolina gives us her 2 cents on like what makes you actually appreciate a follow-up.
I would say putting some, like Denise mentioned, putting some thought to it and making it intentional, right? Like I see a lot of thank you notes that are very, okay, so I'll give you, I guess, my bad thank you note would be not to send one. If you do send one and it's very generic, thank you for your time, looking forward to next steps, I think that's equally bad. And then if you're adding value, you could add value, but also you want to show that you're listening, right? So if I do see that the message is intentional, that there's a reflection, I think, it's a great opportunity to realign fit, right? Why are you a good fit for the company versus I bring the skills, tie it back to why you're a good fit for each other type of thing. Remind them about the conversation. So sometimes, when I read those, I'm like, okay, great. You hit on a lot of those points. I put eyes on a lot of the thank you notes before we send them over to our clients. If it's, let's say on my recruiting side, if I'm coaching, I'm still kind of coaching them and seeing what I'm getting. And that's the biggest piece. The tie-in, I feel a lot of candidates miss tying it back in to why they're a good fit for the role. They're just dumping, these are all the skills I have. And you're just reminding them of the skills, but you're not tying it back to anything else.
And Caroline, I want to dig into the recruiter side of you just a little bit more, because I think it's also important for people out there to have realistic expectations of what a follow-up is going to do and not going to do. So, do you as a recruiter actually want candidates to follow up?
Absolutely.
Okay, I just
Especially
needed
with
to point blank have everyone hear that.
I was going to say, especially in this market, I mean, the ones that follow up, they show that they're interested. If I don't see a follow up, I'm going to say, okay, well, you're interviewing at, 10 different places. I'm not going to know if you're interested or not in this opportunity unless you follow up.
Well, and you also said something important. You forward it to the team. Because here comes another potentially loaded question, but honest answer. How often do you actually respond to those follow-ups?
I would say 100% of the time. If a candidate is reaching out to me like, hey, Carolina, thank you for helping me with the process. I mean, the thank yous I get, it's more like, thank you for like putting me in contact, with, let's say, this company. So just there, it's, it's helpful, right? You see that and you're like, oh, okay, it's good. This is it's a good candidate. But when they actually take the time to send a thank you note and to do something for the client, me as a recruiter is giving me validation. Okay, out of, let's say, 4 or 5 candidates I have in the talent pool that we're presenting over, I start feeling more confident about the ones that are taking the extra step, the ones that actually want this job, right? So if we have the power to say, hey, well, if you're between 2 candidates, I'm going to lean towards more the one that is actually interested in the job versus the one that showed no interest.
Also, please note, I loaded the panel with a Recruiter Plus coach. So of course she's actually responding to the follow-ups, because I will say most recruiters do not. However, I don't mean that as a judgment on them. They're probably getting lots of them. The goal or the hope is that they're forwarding them on, because there's a statistic, everybody out there. Only 25% of candidates, and we've kind of gotten into the interview phase here of follow-up, which is one that really people do not know how to handle. So this is a good first place to start. But only 25% of candidates actually send a follow-up in the interview process. I may have blipped, so I'll re-say it. 25% of candidates send a follow-up. However, 85% of hiring managers report that it does influence the decision-making process. So you have to remember who the follow-up is for and who it maybe isn't for. But a lot of times that recruitment piece is who is disseminating the information. And so that is important. Denise, chime in.
Sorry. So if you're doing a panel, if you're as a panel interview, or you're interviewing with multiple people in one day, do not send them all the same follow-up or thank you email, because they talk. They absolutely talk. I mean, I've done thousands and thousands of interviews in my 30 plus years in HR, and it used to drive me nuts because we all talk afterwards. And they're like, yeah, I got this really nice note and it said blah, blah, blah. And you're like, yeah, I got the same one. I got the same one. And now that person went from wow to, well, they can't be bothered to send, custom for each of us. So they didn't see an individual value from us. So if you're going to do it, don't send the same one. Customize it for everybody you send it to, please.
Yes. It takes an extra 30 seconds, but if you just heard that statistics, it made a huge difference. And my piece I'll add to this is I think that we often as candidates will miss an opportunity to follow up in the form of an update, because this is the best form of follow-up, and the best little tidbit you have to include in an email is, hey, Carolina, thank you again for, facilitating that interview process last week. Wanted to let you know I am now in the final round of something else. And that is the exact kind of stuff that you don't have to go make that up. But in a way, you can leverage different points of a different process in order to follow up, stay front of mind, and let another recruitment process know where you stand in a timeline. And I don't know why people feel really weird, like they shouldn't be doing that. And I'm like,
some do it to make it, they make it up thinking that they can get leverage. So
yes,
and they always get caught. Always get caught. Yes. So if you're doing it, only do it if it's
real.
I
agree.
Yeah. Same with people who try to go make up an offer to get leverage. Don't do that. Just don't do it. Do not. If you have to lie, because this is lying, if you have to lie in order to push something along or get something that you want, you have now gotten a job disingenuously, and it isn't going to stick. But that's an entirely different conversation. So here's where I want to go next. This is all great stuff about interviewing, and we're probably going to come back to it. Now I want to go, before you even get to the interview, you are, let's say, networking with people, whether they are, warm contacts or actually in your Rolodex, whether it's cold outreach on LinkedIn, whatever it is, you reach out to somebody and they don't respond. How do you follow up in the context of it not being an interview, but in that informational interview networking phase? Denise?
I'll usually do one, and it's basically, everybody is so busy. I know you probably are swamped. I just want to make sure that this didn't fall through the cracks. I would really be appreciative if you could share X, Y, and Z. This is what I'm looking at, because people are more likely to help with an informational ask than if they feel like you're trying to hit them up for a job or you're expecting them to help you find a job. So I do one, and then if they still don't respond, read the room. Because it's different than in an interview type thing. But if this is an outreach, if they don't respond after the second one, just read the room.
Yep. Read the room is such great advice, because you can read the room even if it's a virtual container. Carolina, what do you think when it comes to, for you as a recruiter, on your recruiter hat, when people reach out to you, maybe about a role that's open, but they aren't actually in the interview process yet, what do you want to see, and how frequently do you want people to follow up with you?
So I would say the fact that you message me, that's a good thing. Typically, if I get, 300 applicants, but 5 took the time to connect with me and sent me a message, I look at those first. I'm just giving that priority. So sometimes I'm not even getting to the pile of interview of applied candidates, because maybe I grabbed a couple that reached out to me directly. So I would say I always encourage, if you are interested in a role, maybe connect with a recruiter, connect with the hiring manager, connect with someone in the company as a first kind of follow-up, so to speak. After that, I agree with Denise. Read the room. If it's been a couple days, a week, nothing, you could always say, hey, just wanted to follow up. Things fall through the cracks. I know you probably get bombarded, with messages, right? So try to make a second attempt. And then after that, yeah, if you're not hearing a response, then kind of drop it type of thing. I do see sometimes candidates where, let's say, I mean, especially on the agency side, I mean, we're doing a lot of like headhunt searches. So it's very specific kind of niche of what the client is looking for. And of course, we want to help every single candidate, but sometimes we don't have anything, right? And I get a candidate and I reply back, hey, I don't have anything for you right now. Let's network. And then 2 days later, hey, wanted to see if you had something for me. And I'm like, this is keep an eye out on our job boards. If I have anything, I'll reach out. And then another week goes by. So I guess, you got to be mindful of also who you're following up. And if maybe you're barking up the wrong tree, right? If I don't have anything for you, maybe you should be spending that time connecting with someone at a hiring company versus the recruiter. So.
Well, and the fine line between annoyance and persistence is different in each of these scenarios. So let's start with that one. So Carolina, in that situation, you connect with somebody who is the right type of candidate for the pools that you headhunt in, but there's nothing specific open for them. How often should they really be checking in with you?
I would say keep an eye out on the job board. If you see something that you qualified for, then that could be a good opportunity for a follow-up. Let's say I already told them, hey, I don't have anything, but something new came in. You can kind of say, hey, I saw, this job through the website. Are you, do you have any information on it? So it's you're reaching out again because you saw a post versus just checking in if there was a job available.
You have
so
a
I would say it
reason.
depends. You have a reason.
You have a
exactly.
hook. So in that situation, you have to just be patient. I know that's a word all of you job searching out there really love, but you have to be patient and wait for the right reason to leverage the connection and
Correct.
to leverage the communication. Denise, scenario is back to the networking, to the Rolodex. So that message that you mentioned about like, hey, wanted to make sure this didn't like fall through the cracks. What would be the timeline between maybe the first message and not hearing anything that you would follow up on that?
I wouldn't do it more than 4 days, or more frequently than 4 days, but not more than a week. I didn't probably said that wrong. Somewhere between 4 days and a week.
Four days and a week.
Right. 4 days, they may not have had time to, especially if it's over the weekend, give it a week. But once you have to get past a week, then it becomes an afterthought. It's not intentional follow-up. It's like an afterthought follow-up. So can I ask a question, Carolina? I'm sorry. Just kind of going off on a little thing here. So we always tell our clients networking in is the best way to get a job. Sorry about my dog in the background, by the way.
No, dogs are welcome. I'm sure Taco Cat will make an appearance at some point in one of these.
So, we tell them network. You don't want to just randomly apply for jobs. Try and find people you might know at the company and blah, blah, blah. And the question comes up because I've seen one or two people hurt by this, where some companies will not take a referral unless the referring employee submits the job or the application, as opposed to the job applicant applying online. So how do people find out about that? How do they address it? What's the best way to handle that?
Carolina, before you answer, I want to repeat the question because I want everybody out there to understand what Denise is asking because it's highly applicable. This is, how do we make sure an internal referral knows the process? Because there are some companies where you can get that retroactive connection made if you apply and then a connection wants to internally refer you. But there's some companies where that isn't the case and it has to come first. So how do we enable that? Is that the question, Denise?
Yes. And how do they even know? I mean, I've always told clients that you always check your network first, reach out, then apply. Just because of that there's few companies that have that. Nope. Once you apply, you lose that networking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like, what's the right order of operations here? And I'm sure it varies based on the scenario. So Carolina, shed some light on us.
No, I would say first the network. I mean, again, each company is different, so I speak to the ones I kind of know. Typically, nowadays we're grabbing a lot of good candidates from the referrals and the network. So there's money, right, involved in the referral. So that's the reality of it, right? So my first approach would be, well, if your cousin or if your friend works at the company, they should go and ask, let's say, their supervisor and say, hey, my friend, my cousin, whatever, has I have a referral. what's the process for me to maybe get this person, through let's say an application. To me, that would be the first step. What I've seen on the recruiter side too, and on our side, it's the same thing, right? If a candidate applies on their own, depending on our contract, with our the companies that we work with, we might have a certain time to represent the candidate. So on the flip side, the same thing, right? If they applied internally and they're already kind of, starting the process, if we go and send them, we're not going to have representation. The same thing if they have a friend that wants to refer them, but they're already too far in the process, they're going to say, no, that's not a referral. The candidate applied on their own. We already started the process. You're not going to get your referral fee, right? So Denise, to your point, I would say if you do have a warm connection, have that person maybe go to HR or whoever to kind of point them in the right direction of what their company policy is for referrals. And then after that happens, then you follow that. Because if not, you're going to start with, I had this situation once where we sent the candidate over. The friend kind of never told the manager that he had a referral after the fact. So we were already too invested, I would say, in the process when when they kind of found out, oh yeah, you knew this person. So anyways, it all worked out. But of course, the internal candidate didn't get a referral fee. They just kind of put a good word, for the person. So
there's a few things here also I want to highlight. Most companies have a referral bonus for an employee who refers someone in and gets hired. I don't know why most people don't realize that. So first of all, if you ain't playing that side of the karma bank game, you're missing out on the opportunity to make some extra cash. And B, if you're not leveraging the grapevine and reaching out and building this network of people who can get you in, you're missing an opportunity to kind of help you both, in all honesty. So for some reason, people kind of miss that.
And people don't network until they need a job instead of building a network and cultivating a network all along. So when they do need a job, everything's already in place.
That's going to end the program, ladies and gentlemen. There it is. And that's the problem is if you're only networking when you quote unquote need to network for a job, it creates this chicken and the egg situation where I see a job online I want to apply for. I do not have a warm connection. And the time in which it may take to get a connection at that place might take you out of that 48-hour ideal application window. So now what do you do? Right? But we can't always have a connection at every place you may want to apply. However, the more you put in the karma bank, the higher the likelihood of it happening. And if you do that continuously, then yeah, you ramp it up when you're actually looking for a job and you scale it back, but you don't scale it back to 0, because if you don't have to go from 0 to 60 and you just keep going at 15, it becomes a lot easier to get the momentum from 15 to 60 and you're not cold. Plus, you may never have to apply for a job again because you've got an engaged network who's looking out for you.
I always tell my clients, I do a 1-to-4 ratio. For every 4 asks you would make, you'd better be giving 1 giveaway. So constantly be aware of your network. And if you see somebody's out of work and you see a job posting, forward it to them. You see an article that might help. So I'd like to do minimum 4 to 1. So for every 4 asks you would do, you need to do at least 1 giveaway, karma giveaway, whatever you want to call it. Yes, because that it works out that the more engaged you are with other people, the less of an ask it is when you need it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I always feel like this is the referral piece is a really great component of an overall follow-up conversation, because essentially that's what we're trying to do through networking, even though we're handling it from a relational perspective. Everybody knows what's going on, but the people who get it because they've done the 1-to-4 or some variation thereof. Be somebody who gets it and don't just take, because there's multiple ways to fill the karma bank. I love it. Okay, so we've talked about, let me summarize where we're at as far as like timing of follow-ups. If you are connecting with a recruiter, whether they're at a company or like a third party or a firm, your follow-up is not about time, it's about opportunity and using something you see open as the hook to re-engage. If you are networking and working your Rolodex, then what I heard was follow-up time is somewhere between 4 to 7 days, maybe 10, depending on who it is. If it's a higher level, executive person, give them a little bit of of buffer, but the fine line between annoyance and persistence is that. Now let's come back to interviews, because we talked a lot about how and what to say. Now let's talk about when, because this is the number one I have no idea how and when to follow up question. And so, Carolina, talk to me about how you handle this from on a coach hat, understanding the recruitment process of the timing of following up after an interview.
So I always recommend within 24 hours. Of course, things happen and it might be a little bit more, but give or take 24 hours, right? If the
So your
interview is in the
thank
morning,
you goes out within 24
Mhm.
hours. Yes.
correct, within
Cool.
24 hours of the interview. So if the interview, let's say it's in the morning or early afternoon, it could be the same day, right? Like towards the end of the day. If it's, let's say, late during the day, you can wait so they have it by, by first thing in the morning type of thing. So yeah, I would say timely in terms of the conversation. You want it to be fresh enough in their minds to kind of think about the conversation, but also you want to give yourself a little bit of time to reflect, to put something thoughtful, and to realign with the fit. Because yeah, I've seen sometimes candidates send the thing, literally 5 minutes after, and you think about it and you read it and you're like, well, is this a template? Or typically
It's
when
almost
those are
too
quick,
fast.
it's too fast. Yes. So avoid the too fast. So give yourself a couple of hours, but within the 24-hour time frame.
Okay, so now let's say you've done that and you don't hear anything. What's the next move, Denise?
Well, the first off is, did you ask them at the end of the interview what the process is and where they are in the time frame? Because so many people don't do that. So now they're just throwing darts at anything. So
They don't know.
No, they don't know. So if it could be that you're the last one and they're going to make a decision tomorrow and you're not sending something, you send your thank you, but then you don't send a follow-up for a week. Or it could be they're telling you, hey, we've just started this process. We expect this round to take at least 2 weeks. And now you're sending them something at 5 days and 7 days. And but like knowing asking what the time frame is, what the next steps are. I always like to tell clients, don't ask, generic, what's the next steps? Ask things like, who will I be meeting with in the next round? That's psychological.
You can
like
totally
moved to
take
the
an
next round.
assumptive tone.
Yes.
Yes.
You do that forward focused. Who will I be meeting with? What's the time frame? And then use that and make sure that you are following up accordingly. Now, again, if you've come across something that you think would absolutely resonate with them, with it, and it's not an ask, and it's less than a week, I say go for it, because you're adding value, and it's more of a, hey, saw this, thought of you based on what you said, blah, blah, blah. You're not saying, okay, by the way, where are you? Like, what am I doing? That's an actual give, not an ask.
So this is where we get into the very coach answer of it depends. And that's why this also, like this whole follow-up conversation actually warrants a deep dive, because there are infinite scenarios we can't even cover. But it is so number one is get a commitment of when you're going to hear, because then we have a good rule of thumb on when to follow up post thank you. So thank you 24 hours. The next touch point, if you don't hear, depends on the timeline they set for you. And my rule of thumb is to give them 24 hours on the end of that for buffer, because sorry, Carolina, if there's one thing I tell people, is that you're never going to hear back on the timeline promised or the timeline you want.
It's
and
true.
So that just gives them a little bit of buffer. So you're being proactive, but also being respectful. So now there is a dual scenario that I think may be handled similarly, and I want to hear how you guys deal with it. That is that timeline plus the 24-hour buffer comes and goes, and it's time to say something. Or there was no timeline established at the end of the interview, because even though we can preach from the pulpit about asking, we may not know. So if you don't know, or the timeline passes and you don't hear, what do you do, Carolina?
So it depends. So the same thing, right? If you're dealing with an agency, I'm not saying you can be more persistent with the agency, but my candidates call me and they're following up, and
But you kind of can. You can be a
But
little bit more direct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can be a lot more direct if you're calling, let's say, the recruiter that is representing you through the process. So to your point, and Denise, what you said, I think it's the most recommended thing after an interview, and you can use that too as a, hey, thank you for the time, I'm very excited, and then you dive into kind of when should I be hearing back. But I guess going back to Angie's point, if you're going through the agency, you could always ask. I mean, if you didn't ask during the interview, we should know. Do they have more candidates? We're always in constant communication with our clients, making sure that we kind of know those timelines. I had a situation where, the hiring manager was out for a week, HR was out for a week, they were traveling. So I knew we were going to have a week of quiet pretty much. So that's something I was able to share with the candidate. So I would say if you didn't ask, go to the agency first, try to get that timeline to see where you stand with everything. If you did the process yourself, typically at some point talent acquisition is involved or HR. I wouldn't probably go to the hiring manager directly if you didn't ask at the end of the interview and ask for the timeline. Maybe you can do that as a follow-up for HR. Hey, thank you for setting this up. I really enjoyed meeting the team. I'm very excited. This still remains my top choice. I was wondering, what's the timeline for next steps? So I think if it's HR, it could be a lot more appropriate. And then the third choice that I would give would be directly with the hiring manager if you really had to do a follow-up.
Which, and maybe this is a good segue, is who is the right person to follow up with at that point? Because let's say you've gotten into the interview, and Denise, I can tell you have thoughts. So you'll let to go first, right? So you've had the recruiter call, you had a hiring manager interview, you send your thank you to the recruiter and say, thanks for facilitating and setting this up. You send an email to the hiring manager and say, thanks for the conversation, blah, 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 blah. Now, who gets the follow-up 10 days later when expected timeline plus 24 hours has passed?
Well, because I always tell my clients, again, do a give, not an ask. I always say do it to the hiring manager, because you're not asking them for an update. You're getting forefront in their mind again. You're giving them some kind of valuable information or whatever. So you've now put yourself forefront in their mind. You're not saying, well, did I get the job? Where am I at? Like, what is it? Because the chances of you not getting an answer increase dramatically with that. But because you're doing it as a give, not an ask, I tell them, don't even ask about it. Just give this, get on the forefront of their mind again. Mm-hmm. The other piece I do is if they tell you when you're interviewing, if the timeline is 2 weeks or more, don't wait 2 weeks. You better find something to reach out to them with, oh, I thought this would be interesting, at a week or just over a week, because you don't want to be forgotten. That's one of the disadvantages if you're interviewed early, is you then
have to have a good reason in there. It can't just be like, hey, I'm checking in, even though it's been 8 days instead of the 14 you told me to wait. Like, you can't, it has to have
a value give. Yeah, a value. Yes. Because again, the goal there is to just be forefront in their minds, not to put them on the spot, not to ask, if you're still in it or whatever. It's just relationship building. Because, 99% of the people aren't getting the job. But if you've built that relationship, that can only help you down the road. So don't look at it as a one-off. Look at it as a building your foundation too.
This is a human-focused thing, people. And I know it does not feel like it because of the amount of dehumanization that has happened, especially on the front end of these like hiring processes. But once you get to talking to humans, remember you're talking to humans, and it is a relationship building thing. And we could even go so far to say it is a marketing and impressions visibility relationship thing. And in marketing, it takes anywhere between 8 and 20 touches to actually build familiarity with somebody. And so there is something to draw from here to think about, like, this isn't necessarily like a one and done situation. And Lynn posted something in chat that I think is really important in this whole, remember, this is a human to human thing, is that don't be an asshole and say, hey, I never heard back from you, because I do want to talk about the ghosting here in a second, because we know it's happening, but you cannot message somebody and say, I never heard back from you. Where are we in the process? Because that is an instant poke. I used to have, back when I was an engineer, I used to have this, he was a real firecracker of a manager kind of guy. And the fact that he is the person who taught me this is funny, because his personality was just a big poke. But he used to say, when you email somebody, you can't poke them, right? You can't go, hey. You have to ease into it and be a human. And so, Lynn, I'm glad you made that point, that giving people grace, which is why we put the 24-hour buffer on things, and know that even in the hiring process, the fact that you're going to come in and bring value and fill a needed role does not mean that hire is the number one priority in the business. I'm sorry, everybody. Yes, even in human first, impact driven brands that have good cultures, the hiring is not usually the number one priority to them, even it is though it is to you. And we have to remember that. Now, let's talk about the very unhuman part of ghosting, because we can do everything right. We can send the right thank you. We can send a thoughtful, value added follow up at the right time in the window, and then we don't hear. And then maybe we send another one, timing with which we may want to discuss, and we still don't hear. What do you say that second and third time if there's been no communication, and at what point do you stop? Caroline, I'm going to come to you first.
So I would start with saying, don't say, oh, I haven't heard back from you and I wanted to reach out, right? So going back to what Denise said, made it
Instant
thoughtful.
mark red, no response, people. Instant.
Correct. So if you do have the leverage that you're in a time constraint because you're dealing with maybe another offer in hand, and you really like this opportunity, I would say you can use that card with the recruiter, at least let them know kind of where you stand. You can still do that, with HR or the hiring manager. But if not, it would be more like, not checking in type of thing, but maybe doing the value add or following them on LinkedIn, following the company. Maybe you can comment on their post. And then if you do need to kind of follow up after the ghosting, let's say, hey, I just wanted to check in, see how the process is moving along. Wanted to let you know I still remain very interested on this opportunity. I'm like, what would next steps look like type of thing. But yeah, I wouldn't go too crazy on like, give me a response without kind of reading the room a little bit first.
I feel like read the room is like the
I
giant.
think so.
Last month, it was networking is job searching.
Mm-hmm.
This month, it is read the freaking room. Denise, I would love to hear what you want to add to this. Especially, I want to hear your thoughts on like, at what point do you, quote unquote, for lack of a better term, give up?
Yes. So you send your initial thank you within 24 hours. You send a value add contact within 7 days. If depending upon what the initial time frame was, if they said 7 days and you don't hear anything after that initial value add, maybe you send one 4 or 5 days later. Hey, just came across this, thought you might be interested. Oh, and by the way, just checking in on where you are in the process. I know things are probably crazy. People are taking vacations, whatever. Just that kind of thing where it's not confrontational. It's almost like a backdoor ask. And then if you still don't hear anything, I would give it one more week. I'm a firm believer in, other than your first thank you, 3 outreaches, no response. Read the room.
Same.
Yeah.
Because within like the first, I would say 2, no news it doesn't necessarily mean bad news. It may just go back to like that prioritization. So silence doesn't always mean no. It just may mean kind of not yet. After 3, I just assume it's not happening and put your efforts elsewhere.
I do have a question though. So you're going to put your efforts elsewhere. Do you close it out with them, or do you just stop sending them the messages? Because I've gone both ways, and I've almost, like, some clients, especially if it's something that it's a big company and they really want to work for the company. It doesn't matter if it's not that job, they really want to work for the company. I'll have them send something, after the 3 outreaches, no response, that just says, I'm just checking in one last time. Really wanted to let you know, I understand that things are a little crazy, and I may not be the right fit for this role. Please know that I am very interested in your company, and I would love to stay connected with you on LinkedIn. So, that, but if it's a company that it's like you wanted that role, not necessarily that company, just give it up. Don't even. That's kind of the rule of thumb I use with clients. It really depends on how much you want to work for that company versus how much you wanted that specific role, because it's a small world. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from clients, I used to work here and I applied for this job, and damn, if I just didn't have that same recruiter and she's working for a different company now, and whatever. It's a small world.
Yes.
When it comes to this. So don't burn bridges, but close out if it's the company that you're interested in. Drop it if it's just the role you're interested in. That's usually what
you actually alluded to something I wanted to talk about, which is follow up after the process. So I want to come back to this in a second. So I want to talk about some of the messaging here. So let's say we do the thank you, we do our 3 follow-ups, and we're at that point where we're like, okay, here's my last Hail Mary message to send before I'm just going to kind of like throw in the towel and move on. Carolina, what do we put in that last message that implies I get you and I don't expect you to follow up, but I'm still open if you're still open, but I don't want to sound desperate, right? How do you do all of that in a sentence or two in that last Hail Mary email? What's it sound like?
So it's pretty much that. Like, let's say as that example, we've done the 3 touches. So you've done the thank you, the 3 touches, crickets. At that point, I would close it out, because if they're still open and look, on the other side, we don't know what's going on. They might be dealing with deadlines. There might be other priorities. Angie, you mentioned this earlier. Sometimes recruiting is not the top priority. That doesn't mean that you're not the top candidate. So by trying to close it out, if there is real interest, that should promote them to say, no, wait, I'm sorry, we've been busy. This has been happening. You're still in the process. So I would frame it as something like, Angie, just wanted to kind of reach out one last time. I enjoyed our conversation, learning about the company. I'm assuming, you probably filled the role by now, or priorities have shifted. I just wanted to kind of let you know I'm interested in staying connected, like Denise said, and kind of, being top of mind if anything else opens up.
Can I say this is a perfect example where AI can help? Because you type into chat or Gemini or wherever and says, okay, here's the scenario. I've done this, this, and this. I want to outreach. Give me 5 possible scripts of how I can do this, how I can outreach, that I don't sound desperate, that I do still sound interested. I don't want to put them on the spot and blah, blah, blah. And I will tell my clients, ask for 5 samples in chat, ask for 5 samples in Gemini, or 5 samples in Claude. Always ask for a minimum of 3 to 5 samples. Don't ever ask it, what should I say? Say, give me 3 to 5, because you'll find out, oh, I like that sentence. Oh, I like this sentence and this one, because I get in my own head. Like, I find times where I'm like, especially if it's an awkward situation where you're like, oh, I don't want to offend them. Oh, and then I get in my own head, and I'll go into chat and I'll tell, here's the scenario. Give me 5 ideas on what I can say, scripts, whatever. And you'd be surprised how much that sparks your ideas. And, oh, that's a good thought. Yeah, let me talk about this. Or, so you're not copying and pasting.
Mm-hmm.
You are using it as kind of a thought provoker.
It's a blank page.
Your writing partner.
Over the blank
exactly,
page, right?
Exactly.
But I love the idea of get it to give you some options and rewrite them, but it helps with the blank page.
Yes.
Correct. And one other thing that came out of this is everybody that you touch during an interview process, you should connect with on LinkedIn, because it becomes a slightly easier, less in your face way to both passively stay in touch and, follow up in a less like way than if you only have their email. So that's something you should always be doing with the hiring managers, with everyone. And so now I want to go to the end of the interview process, which kind of dovetails on something Denise set us up for. You didn't get the job, which we know is more common than it has been in a long time right now. And clients going through, sometimes 2 hands worth of interview processes before they actually get the role. So if it is a company you really want to work for, how do we stay in touch? How do we ask for feedback? How do we keep the door open when we find out we didn't get the job? Carolina, I'm going to come to you first, and I want to talk about the feedback part, because this is probably the bane of most job seekers' existence, because they feel like they can't get it. So how do we ask for it? How do we ask for it in a way that we'll actually get anything? And what should the expectations be of the feedback?
So it depends. I'm going to lead with that again. So on the agency side, we typically, and we do our best to try to get concrete feedback from our clients. If it's something they said or didn't say in the interview, or if it was just, no, we had a better fit for the company. At least on my candidates, I do like to share actionable feedback that they can kind of go back and get better. So that's typically, if you're working with an agency as the recruiter and say, hey, did they tell you anything? And then even if you're doing it through the agency, you can still connect with them on LinkedIn and send a quick kind of thank you message. Hey, I heard from, the agency, they communicated to me the news, while I'm disappointed, about to hear the news, I wanted to appreciate the opportunity you took to interview me, and I enjoyed the conversation and want to stay in touch. So even if you're doing it through the recruiter side of things, give it a little bit of time, and you can still connect with them on LinkedIn and then maybe send that follow-up message. If you're doing it directly with the company, I think that's a great opportunity to thank them for their time. Again, you're sad about the news, but you could always say, is there anything, in your decision making that, that I could have done better? I would say, ChatGPT could help you a lot with the word track there, but you could say, as I'm interviewing, I appreciate, actionable feedback, anything you can share with me that I could maybe apply for future interviews would be greatly appreciated. So something, again, you're human, you're genuinely asking for feedback to get better. So if I'm reading that as a recruiter, if I'm reading that as a hiring manager, hey, at least I want to tell you, no, it wasn't anything you did. Maybe it was that. So sometimes you don't get it. That's the disappointing part. Sometimes people don't want to give feedback. So if you don't get it, don't get discouraged. But I would say always ask.
So I just want to clarify one thing from a corporate side. There are a majority of companies out there that have strict no feedback policies because they're afraid to be sued. So it's not that somebody doesn't want to take the time to give it to you. They may not be allowed to give it to you because companies have had people give feedback and that person's used feedback to sue them. Discrimination, whatever the case may be. So don't take it personally. Absolutely always ask. Like Caroline's saying, always ask. And especially if an outside agency or something is involved, they may be able to get a little more information. But if it was directly with the company and they can't or won't give you it, know that it's probably because they're restricted from giving it. It's not personal.
Yeah. And that, in general, I think that's a good highlight here is this goes back to that human thing, right? The hiring is still a human to human activity, even though we've put lots of stuff in the way of that. And it can be easy because of a lot of those things that are in the way. And also because it's a very human process to feel like everything is a very personal. 98% of the time, it's actually not about you, which doesn't necessarily suck less, but it can help you with a little bit of a different perspective of this is oftentimes due to company policy, company process, or even if you aren't selected, it isn't that they didn't choose you, they chose someone else. And I know that can be hard to think about, but it can help with a mindset that helps you through the emotional mental toll that job searching takes and we don't talk about enough. But that comes into play in this follow-up piece because that's where difference can be made. You have to also be really, really human, but also don't get overly connected to anything until the ink dries, and it will help you just keep that more kind of neutral perspective going through it. But I love the advice on ask for feedback. You're not going to get it if you don't ask. They're not just going to fess up and tell you hey, I had a client about a month ago who asked for feedback because he was a software engineer and had done a project. And unbeknownst to us, the Easter egg inside the project was the use of AI intentionally because it was a company that has a high AI adoption. And we missed it. And they told us that in the feedback. That we're a high AI adoption shop and our expectation was that you were going to leverage it to do this exercise, whereas he kind of took the martyrdom route and wanted to do it on his own. And so we got that feedback. And so now he knows to look out for that in the future. And it actually was helpful, but we wouldn't have gotten that feedback if we didn't ask, and you won't get it all the time. A lot of times, not because of anything about you and company process. And absolutely, if you are interested in a company, say to somebody at the end of the interview, when you get the email that says we selected somebody else, you write back and you say, congratulations. I'm so glad you found a good fit. I am still really interested in this company and would love to stay connected about other opportunities. Can I reach out if I see something? Just put it out there and ask. Then you've left the door open to go back.
And make them one of your gives, not takes down the road.
Yes.
Nurture that relationship from now until the next time you might need them.
Yes.
Don't just wait till you need them again.
And I'll actually add one more thing on the give. Audra had a really good line in the comment. She said, rejection is a redirection. And that's totally true, because one thing I've seen in this market is, yes, you may have to interview for more roles than you ever have, but the one you get is the best fit of them all because of just the nature of the competitive market and the fact that companies can be selective and they're going to choose the best fit and you will get the best outcome, right? So oftentimes things can happen for you if you look at it that way.
And never turn down an interview. I've had people say, well, I'm not really sure if I want that. Don't turn it down. If
You never
nothing else,
know.
it's experience. And then you may find out that there's something about that company that you didn't know or that role. And you're like, oh my God, this is like perfect. So never turn it down on face value. You can always learn something from it. And you may find out, like Caroline was saying, that's the job. That's the perfect one.
This
It
happened this
doesn't
past
hurt.
fall to a client. And she was like, I got reached out for this, but nothing about this sounds like anything I want. And I was like, why don't you just take the first call, be curious? And she was blown away. And it's like her perfect job now. She got it. And it was her perfect job. We don't know enough based on a job description or based on the simple outreach to schedule that first call to say yes or no. And you're not wasting anybody's time to say, I'm going to be curious and to learn more. And you may need to go through 2 or 3 interviews with that mentality before you decide whether or not it's a fit. At the point that you know you wouldn't take it, now you step out to not waste time. But if you liked aspects of it, you kind of stay in touch. And so there, in general, in the world of job searching, there are steps to get a job, but all of those steps happen in a very chaotic, in-ordered way. And if you can embrace that fact and get creative and think about being human, you actually will get through this with a better outcome and way more sanity. And so as we close out this is a good follow-up, has so many nooks and crannies to it. That's why I wanted to have a conversation about it. And so what I want to do as we kind of wind things down is, first of all, remind everybody out there, if you are struggling, these are 2 people you should be reaching out to. So as a reminder, these are every month we're showcasing a couple coaches that came from the Job Seeker Summit, which had such great attendance and need that we were like, hey, we might as well keep this going. So by the way, next month, and it will be live in a few minutes, as soon as I end this, I'll post it live. We will be doing AI in your job search, how to use it well and where to misstep. So that's going to be June 3rd, everybody, is the next Job Seeker Summit Momentum Series featuring Matt Thomas and Chris DeBracchi-Baytu. So stay tuned. I'll post that up here in a second. Follow along, because these are people who give out great advice. Speaking of giving things away, these are people who give 4 things away to get 1. Surround yourself with people like them. So let's give everybody another last little tidbit. If somebody leaves this session and changes one thing about how they follow up, what should it be? Caroline, I'm going to start with you.
Make it intentional and make sure you tie it back to why you're a good fit for the company. Don't just skill dump. Tie it back. Always.
Oh, don't just
what are
skill
you
dump.
What are you adding to them, right? What problem are you solving? Why, like, tie it back. If I can give you one piece, it would be that.
Be relevant. All right, Denise, what do you want? Be relevant, be intentional. So you actually got a 2 for there, everybody. Denise, what do you think?
Do your research. For those of you, you know me, I'm the AI geek. And I teach all of my clients how to do deep research. And it makes all the difference, from the networking, from the outreach to the interview, to helping you. What are you going to reach out? What are you going to do for that follow-up email? Oh, I did deep research. I can pull this out. So take advantage of AI and the deep research feature on companies that you're really interested in. Even the free versions, you can do at least 1 or 2 deep researches a day, or sometimes over a couple of days.
Yes. You have no reason not to know anything about the companies that you are interviewing for right now. And so, as a little preview into the AI situation that we're going to talk about next month, this is the kind of stuff that we're going to look at. Like, where do you use it thoughtfully? Where do you not use it thoughtfully, but you probably are, right? And so, great feedback to be intentional and leverage the resources that you have to supplement and enhance that intention as you follow up. And my biggest takeaway for all of you leaving here is follow up. Don't not do it.
Just do it.
That's why we dedicated an hour to all of these ins and outs of different scenarios and what to say and when to say and how to say, because the last thing that you want to do is be forgotten, even if you were a top candidate, right? Because just because you are the top candidate doesn't mean you're going to be remembered amongst a sea of other priorities and amongst a sea of other people who are following up and showing proactivity. So follow up is part of job searching. Don't not do it. Caroline and Denise, thank you so much for being here today and giving some of your 4 to everybody out there as we help people job search a little smarter instead of harder. So
Thank you so
both.
much, Angie, for
Awesome.
having us.
Thank you.
We will we'll see you on June 3rd at 10 Mountain, noon Eastern for Smart AI for Job Seekers, where it helps and where it hurts. That event will be posted live here on LinkedIn for you. Mark yourself in attendance in the next few minutes. Until next month, stay sane out there. Reach out for help. You don't have to do this alone. See you next month. Thank you both. Thanks everybody for joining.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Thanks.